joining everyone kind of a small group.
Yeah, that's okay.
Okay, well, in the interest of time, we can get going. So hopefully everyone has an agenda that was emailed out. So usually in our opening statements, we like to give Dan a chance to talk about any, items that might be pertinent, and obviously the big one, of course, is the flooding.
Yeah, some of these things overlap today, but I just, regarding to flooding, I hope if anybody did have flooding, they have taken advantage of getting the paperwork for our emergency recharge policy, and we'll be filling that out. And we'll talk more about, states and other things we're doing in that regard. Cody, would you like to talk about how that's looking in Allensworth right now? I know some of that has receded and it's kind of around now to the west of you. Are you still having any additional issues?
At this time, no. Looks like a lot of, like you said, the water has receded and lots of areas just look dry. We're hoping that it stays that way, but we know it's not going to be that way. But right now we are okay.
Good. And Nicole, are you experiencing flooding? Do you have an update on flooding in your area?
No update at this time. Sorry, I have some construction going on in the background here, so I'm gonna keep myself on mute. But no update at this time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Nicole. All right.
Do you want to mention Land IQ?
Sure. I can skip down Land IQ. So we have, Aaron and I had a discussion with Land IQ recently. They have a proposal to do flood mapping and provide data on flood mapping that would go back to before flooding occurred and would update every 3 to 6 days at a parcel level, so we could see where parcels were flooded and be able to map that out. We again kind of overlaps with the Basin Safe, but we're very concerned. We don't want to debit people's accounts where there was flooding. We want to make certain that we understand where that flooding occurred and when it occurred. So at the board meeting, I hope to present a proposal from Land IQ so that we can work to get that data.
Okay, just looking to see if anybody had any questions before we move on. Yeah, we'll certainly keep everybody informed on the Land IQ, and that flood mapping. So let me give you some quick updates. Jeff, did you have a question? You turn on your video. Did you have? Okay. All right. Quick updates on the Tule subbasin. Obviously, both the Tule and Sawyer Lake subbasins were found to be inadequate. The GSP, the inadequate determination letters. Two things have, well, actually, a few things have happened since our last meeting with this group. Both subbasins have met with the State Water Resources Control Board staff and DWR staff, or at least some of them were on the call. The actual State Water Resources Board had a meeting, not a hearing, a meeting on the 4th of April, earlier in the month. It was an interesting meeting. Those of you that may have attended, it's available on YouTube, on the State Water Resources Control Board YouTube channel for anybody. You've got to go about 3 hours or so, 3+ hours into the meeting to get the part that's involved with, specific to the GSPs. There were several comments made by state staff that were a bit disturbing. one of them was the fact that they basically said to the board that we are not collecting groundwater pumping data. And they didn't have much faith in the remote sensing methodology for collecting that data. And we felt that that was a gross misrepresentation of that. And it left the wrong impression with the board members and certainly the people in the audience. There were several comments about wells still going dry, you know, and then you know, related to that, there wasn't a single comment about the amount of flooding that we're facing down here. And I realize that not all 6 subbasins that were found to be inadequate are facing the same problems. But the fact that you're ignoring, you know, historic floods that we're facing down here and not even bringing that up, I just found that to be very disturbing and really, you know, it again, just bothersome that they weren't taking that into account. There was a lot of discussion with the state board as to how they were going to prioritize the basins and the actual hearings that would occur, the probationary hearings that would occur for each basin. They laid out some timelines, and essentially it's noticing a probationary hearing and then 1 year to coordinate with us. And if after minimum of 1 year, we're not at a point where they feel like we're making sufficient progress, then they can start to implement in writing their own plan for the sub-basin. And so there was some discussion, or considerable amount of discussion with the board on that. And then they try to figure out what the priorities would be of the 6. And they've mentioned things like number of wells going dry, subsidence, overdraft, you know, the total amount of overdraft. And in each of those items that they mentioned, both the Tule Subbasin and Tulare Lake were in the top 3 each time. So we expect that probably both, at least one, if not both, subbasins will be, you know, at the earliest available hearing, and then the second one would, you know, would follow shortly thereafter. They have not issued, as of today, or at least as of 10 o'clock today, they have not issued any of the notices for the probationary hearings. I had a call yesterday with the State Water Resources Board staff, asking them to schedule another meeting with us, and David DeGroot has done the same for the Tule Subbasin. And in that, I did ask the state staff if they had a date yet, and that has not occurred there. They did not give me any additional information as to when that notice would go out for the probationary hearing. There is a state board meeting on the 2nd of May. I looked at the agenda yesterday. We are not on the agenda, meaning none of the Sigma or GSPs are on the agenda for the second meeting, but they do meet every other week. And so, you know, who knows, in mid-May, they may come back to the board with some, you know, with some priorities as to which basins are going to be going through the probationary process first. There wasn't really any new information that the board staff could, you know, were willing, or at least they weren't willing to share with me yesterday on the call. Mm-hmm. So, Deanna, anything, did I miss anything? Is there anything else that we should share with the group?
Go ahead.
Yeah, Jeff, go ahead.
Yeah, you know, I have the benefit of, you know, getting around and kind of hearing different perspectives on all of this. And I guess I'm curious why there isn't more effort here in a Tule and a Tulare Lake to resolve the issues that were identified by DWR prior to, you know, why we're worried about going into probation right away. I just, or having a probationary hearing. I mean, I did attend, I think Deanna, maybe you were there too with the blueprint and the people from DWR who are tasked. I don't know if they were the ones who gave the report to the state board. That fella, I forget his name. Deanna, maybe you remember, but I did not get the impression then that they were in a big hurry to go put people on probation. And it just seems like, DWR's identified the parts of the plans that are inadequate. And I just think our efforts ought to be on addressing those. And if we're busy doing that, we don't give the reason, the state board is completely discretionary. They're not under any time. There's no clock that's running that requires them to have a probationary hearing even. It's completely at their discretion. And it just seems like the things that were listed as inadequate for all these subbasins are within the realm of the fixable. And that's where our efforts ought to be focused rather than kind of anticipating that somehow or other state board's going to come on us. And then the second point I'd make is that fella who was leading this effort for the state board, when he talked about metering and we said, hey, we're all using Land IQ, evapotranspiration, and he was unaware of it. And I was able to give the state board staff, I just had it available mid-Cahuilla. Of course, on Land IQ, they published by crop how much water it really shows well. So I gave that to him. I was able to produce that, even during the meeting. And I think and that isn't something that just you guys need to do, but they need education from Joel Kimmelshoe on Land IQ, the science behind it, and why. I've had vigorous and robust discussions with GSA managers, over the past 2-3 years about, who are adamant that we need to do metering and came to see the wisdom of Land IQ. But, this fella from the state board hasn't had the benefit of any of that knowledge. Or those discussions. So those 2 points in particular, I'm wondering why, we're not trying to cure this problem we're in with DWR and the inadequacy ahead of formally getting into the state board process.
Well, I'll take a quick stab at some of that. The gentleman's name at the blueprint, I believe, is James Knockbauer. He has in our subsequent discussions with the state, Natalie Stork has definitely been more in the lead position. And this was one of my frustrations with the board meeting the other day, where the Department of Water Resources and state staff gave an update on the inadequacies, and even the Department of Water Resources stayed quiet when they said that we weren't collecting data on pumpers. And so I agree with you that there's an education component to this. I am a proponent of finding somebody for each subbasin that can speak before state board early and often, even if it's not on the agenda. Make some statements and start educating them, because my personal feeling is, even if state board wanted to rule in one of our favors, they have no cover to do so because they haven't been given the information necessary. So I agree with you 100%, and that is something that I am hopeful to move the other managers towards. And we have had discussions in both subbasins about that. No decision has been made on a person for either subbasin yet, but I think it's very important. And it's really, no offense to Amir here, it's really not a technical person at that point. It's somebody who has knowledge of what we've accomplished here, but has the experience and know-how as how to effectively speak before state board, who in effect will be our judge at some point. So that is something that I hope to work towards. And on the fix, both subbasins want to fix the deficiencies that the department has determined. I think there is some opaqueness. There's some uncertainty as to how that fix looks, and particularly in the Tule, where we have 3 separate ways that we've determined MTs, and some with a desire to still explain the modeling effort that has fallen flat twice now. There's just an ongoing discussion about how this looks to fix that in the Tule. And in Tulare Lake, we're having the same discussion on how to identify exactly what we need to fix and how to go about that in a strategic way, knowing whatever we do, we have to do in a way that takes, into consideration that we're not sending it back to the Department of Water Resources at this point. Now that fix is going to state board. So it's a strategy and a fix at the same time. And it's just frankly a big lift that we're all trying to deal with at the sub-basin level.
So, Jeff, not to make this sound like an excuse, and I apologize because it's going to sound a little bit like I'm making an excuse, but it took us 3 weeks before we could get that very first meeting scheduled with the state board. We called them 2 working days after the letter came out, and it took them 3 weeks to schedule a meeting with us. It was a 1-hour meeting, and it essentially said to us that you are not to talk to the DWR, and it said to us, which, not those exact words, but it was made very clear that that's not the route that they're going to allow us to go down and have interactive discussions with DWR staff who actually reviewed the document. And then secondly, they could not tell us any more about the process and how much time we might have. So we did reach out to them again, as I mentioned. We've tried to set up a second meeting. We're hoping to make that an in-person meeting, very similar to what Kauai is doing, and have it as a 2-hour meeting where the first portion of the meeting would be an educational component, as Deanna mentioned, and then second would then be, very specific discussions about the items that were found, the deficiencies, essentially. I will say again, and they've told us that they will not schedule that meeting until we give them all of our questions in writing 10 days in advance. And we're like, wow. So that was essentially, I called them again yesterday to go ahead and pencil in some dates for Tulare Lake, and we're having that ongoing discussions. It looks like it's going to be the week of May 15th, which means we've lost a considerable amount of time, but we are committed to revising the document in both subbasins. Whether that happens, Jeff, before the probationary hearing or not, I don't know the answer to that. It's going to, the hearing date, of course, is up in the air. If any of you that did watch the meeting with the state board, the April 4th meeting, there were some board members who were clearly looking for more information before they make any level of decision. And there were other board members who were a little bit more eager to move forward, anxious to move forward, and have something happen right away.
It's also unknown how interactive state staff's going to be with us, because there was some discussion about make sure you fix all the deficiencies before you resubmit to us. Make sure they're fixed. Well, but we thought we fixed it before and we didn't. So, it's a little bit uncertain as to what this looks like still, and we're trying to work through that. But we are all committed to fixing it as quickly as possible, but we also want to do it in a way that it will be accepted. So
Yeah, I appreciate the challenge that you're in. You know, this whole thing has kind of been a little bit, you know, like Alice in Wonderland, right? I mean, they've never really been that clear about what they wanted, and it's been very difficult. And I appreciate that. But I think you do, you know, I was on the Kern groundwater call this morning, you know, take your complexity and then double it in terms of the number of, you know, GSAs that are there. But same thing, you know, inconsistent MTs and MOs, and so, you know, they're trying to unify behind a single consultant to go do it one way, which is, you know, what you're going to ultimately have to do in both your subbasins. You know, you're going to have a consistent methodology, and you need to just go run that and then see, you know, is there anything there you can't live with? I mean, because that's bottom line where you're at. And, you know, Kings got approved, or they're adequate. And some of that was, you know, they had one consultant that did all the GSAs, you know, and they have their own local flavors, but they had a unified approach to their MTs and their MOs. And that is obviously what DWR wants. And I think part of the confusion, you know, I say it a bit flippantly, you know, some people see a conspiracy and other people just see incompetence. And, you know, I don't think they really have a process, and I don't really think they want to know. I mean, I think they want to know. I don't think they know exactly how this is going to play out. And so I see a window of opportunity to actually aggressively go after this. And the only timeline, you know, is when they finally decide to have a probationary hearing. They've got to give you at least 90 days, which is actually quite a bit of time. So until they've given you a notice, I mean, I just think the best use of time is to just work on fixing the stuff DWR did. And if you're working diligently about that, and I think, Deanna, your idea of, you know, having a regular appearance before the state board on public comment, just to keep them updated and maybe even give them more background on, you know, there's a lot of good. I mean, to me, Sigma is a phenomenal success story, you know, at a high level from a public policy standpoint. We haven't told that story. But at any rate, I've said enough, but I think you guys are, you know, understand what's at stake.
Yeah, and I'm in agreement with everything you've said, 100%. I don't think, I've been kind of a pusher. I'm like, somebody needs to make a decision. We need to make a decision. We need to move forward. It's still difficult to get everybody to make a decision and move forward. And I'm hopeful that, you know, we can all get on the same page and agree on the fix and the strategy and move it quickly. I agree with you. And if you have an idea for who that should be for 1 or 2 or 3 of the subbasins, let me know. You know, think that over, because I think we're going to have to fix.
As an advocate.
Yes.
Well, I think you got David Armandsco on. You know, you got a team. You're the only GSA I know of that actually has, you know, a public relations, you know, advocacy group that actually works for you, and that's what they do. And they, you know, I've worked with California Strategies in Southern California. They've got enormous capacity. So you've actually got a very good tool in the toolbox, and I'm sure David could help you out a ton with what you're discussing there.
Yeah, I've been reluctant to do that as a GSA, you know, by ourselves, and so, you know, it's a tough situation. You want to show a united front as a sub-basin, and yet at some point you've got to tell your own story, I guess, too. So it's not easy to choose when to pull the trigger on that.
It's difficult to be a leader. And what you find is that when you do provide leadership and it's principled and good, that you find a lot of people that, you know, are appreciative of you providing that leadership and are willing to join and become part of it. It's just everybody's really busy, and most people are only capable of doing what's right in front of them and not thinking so much strategically. And that's what California Stray. I'm not saying they ought to be the ones who actually do it, but they can definitely help you put the strategy together and find the right people. I would think. Right, David?
Yeah, no, we're here to help, that's for sure.
Great, yep. Thank you.
So let me add a couple of updates to each of the sub-basins. That was the GSP. Both of them are working and moving forward with meetings with the state. On the Tule sub-basin, I wanted to give the group an update on the Allensworth design and where we're at on that. Obviously, we were scheduled 2 months ago to start the surveying out there with the rains and the flooding that occurred. That pushed us back quite a bit. But what we are working on right now is preparing a master plan layout for the facility, and that incorporates some easements. It incorporates the wastewater treatment plant. It incorporates recreational facilities, and it incorporates some habitat. We're trying to schedule a meeting next week with some of our partners from the MLRP program to talk about how to fit in and lay out, potential habitat. When I say habitat, most likely it's going to be wetlands and some kind of water feature. We've had some discussions with the wastewater treatment design team, and so we're trying to lay everything out. And so, Katie, my hope is to have some of these conversations done and then have a layout that we can bring back to the community, to the outreach committee for the MLRP program, to several other organizations, and kind of show all of these components and how they're going to work together as we are moving forward with the specific design of the basins. We want to make sure that there's something laid out for the rest so that we can continue to seek funding and other opportunities there. That'll help some of those other design teams understand what we're trying to do as well. Related to this, we are still, I know I'm jumping ahead to item 3C, but we're still waiting to hear back on the round 2 grant for implementation, the Sigma round 2 grant. We hope to hear that in the June-July timeframe, and that grant application included conveyance, money for the design and construction of the conveyance features. I don't know if it's going to get funded. It is a competitive bid. We all understand what the state budget is probably looking like here in July. So we don't know where we stand on that, but we're still, keeping our fingers crossed and hoping for the best. But we'll we'll have a plan B in place as well for the conveyance features. So I don't have a date yet, Coyote, unfortunately, but as soon as we get some things scheduled, I'd like to come back out. With Deanna and I would like to come back out and meet with the group again and have this layout for you and seek your input as well. This is still a planning document. We want to make sure that we get the input from the community.
We also need to do the site visit, and we have some surveying to do out there, so.
Yeah. So now that the waters have received, oh, sorry, Katie, I saw you, go ahead. Sorry, I saw you take stuff off.
Thank you, Amir. We are having community meetings. We have one, we're trying to have one within the next couple of weeks here to provide updates on flooding and some other things that are happening in the community. So as soon as you have your schedule, please let me know so we can see if we can coordinate some of your visits with our community or community meetings.
So that'd be fantastic. That's actually very helpful.
Yeah, that would be great. That'll help on our outreach efforts too.
Yeah, good stuff, really good.
Yeah. Slurry Lake side, so skipping over to the Slurry Lake side, the next process for that, obviously, is a GSP update. But in addition to that, we are starting a native yield study and the initial discussions on that. And I've talked about this with this group in the past. The idea here is for Slurry Lake to start having some of those conversations that will ultimately start looking at if there's going to be groundwater pumping allocations and what those would look like. The technical portion of that is probably not very difficult and has already been incorporated into the groundwater model, and values are going to come out of that. The real issue is going to be some of the policy discussions that need to happen, and getting buy-in from all 5 GSAs and their boards. So it's going to be a bit of a wild ride, which we anticipate, but we're looking forward to doing that and having those conversations and dealing with, resolving some of those issues as well. As information becomes available for public dissemination, we'll be sharing that with the group as well, and whatever we can until some decisions are made and we get some board buy-in as well. I think that's all we have for the sub-basin updates. Any questions? Anyone have any questions? Sorry, my allergies are killing me. I'm going to grab Kleenex. Yeah. Sorry, apologize. I'll let you guys fill in any questions.
Not seeing any. I'll hit 2C with Basin Safe. I hit on this a little bit before, but Basin Safe for Q1, we will be receiving that data at the end of this month, and we're going to review it. We're going to review it with Land IQ flood mapping, hopefully, and make some decisions. We are going to do a quality control check as far as how that showed up as far as any debits, and probably present to the board some decisions on how to handle this the first quarter of this year, in looking at the flooding that occurred. So we just want to make sure that any debits that come out of an account are done properly, and so that is something that is ongoing. We're working with both Four Creeks and Land IQ, and as well as Geosyntec, and we're going to be looking at those numbers very carefully before any invoices go out for first quarter. Any questions on that? Okay. We're down to the Tule Trust, and we have both Kathy and Susan here in the room, so that's great. I think maybe Susan, would you like to handle that one?
Sure, and then Kathy can fill in whatever maybe I missed. So with the Tule Trust, we've got actually a lot going on, but MLRP is probably at the top of the list there, and we have had a new outreach meeting just earlier this week. I think we are moving things forward. We're finally feeling like we're getting a little momentum behind us. The floods did, I think, made us kind of step back for a minute to see where exactly we were heading in the right direction and how we might handle that. We came across several opportunities because of the floods that we think to be able to continue on with outreach. So we are working on that, and I have started informing folks that I am going to be looking for a farmer landowner advisory board. So anybody that may be interested, I ask that they please reach out, contact me. I will be continuing doing the circuit and making sure that people are aware of that so we can get that established. the MLRP working group did do a visit out to Caponero last week, we actually came to Corcoran and saw the lake. So that all the folks that are working on MLRP that are not from this area to get a better understanding of what the impacts are and what's happening. Caponero is closed in escrow with today possibly, finally. And I'm working on getting our SOLC grant also up and going, which is our Sustainable Ag Land Conservation Program. So we've been having to work on some insurance. We've got that going through, so we'll be able to get started on that grant. And hopefully our watershed coordinator as well. Did I miss anything, Kathy?
I think you caught the trust. The only thing I'm going to add is there's the other watershed coordinator from the Department of Conservation. And we've just finished revising, and that's separate from the trust. It's with the Pixley Irrigation District. And we are looking at the second half of that program. The original watershed coordinator resigned back at the beginning of the year. And we will be advertising for that position probably after we get approval of the new work plan. It's going to be working more with the flooding side of things. So a little separate from MLRP. So we'll let you know when that advertisement goes out, because we'll be looking for somebody to fill that for 18 months. And that was the one that the position that Ren Akiona was working in.
Okay, great. Any questions?
Kathy, do you have a feel for what, or can you expand on flooding and what that position would be looking at as far as, I don't know what they'd be doing regarding flooding?
Basically, the part of it is the climate change side of things. So they're going to be working with probably with some of the elements in the trust. We have a watershed coordinator position that's coming from the Bureau of Reclamation. This is the state one. So they'll probably be looking at opportunities with FloodMar, looking at floodplain, looking at projects in the floodplain that could also benefit recharge. But it needs to be a little separate and apart from MLRP. So I can, as soon as we get approval of the new work plan, I can send you those elements.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. Okay, so moving along, we're actually doing pretty good today.
Yeah.
Implementation on for Tri-County. As Deanna kind of talked about already, the preliminary groundwater recharge policy was approved by the board. It is in place. You've actually received a few.
We've received, yes, and we've received more inquiries. So I think we'll be receiving more, flood policy paperwork. So
Yeah.
We'll be reviewing that.
That's important. It's anyone who is facing any flooding issues right now, take advantage of this emergency policy. It's only good for the calendar year, and it's a good thing to have. I'm really glad that we were able to get that in place. But yeah, if you've got any flooding, if you've got opportunities to put any water on the ground, FloodMar, using surface water in lieu of groundwater, all of those types of opportunities are out there, and we would love to be able to help you or, support you, and try to find ways to make the policy, work for the landowners.
Yep.
I'm gonna assume that you guys are gonna ask questions if you have any, or any comments that anyone would like to make. Otherwise, I'm gonna keep moving on. The multi-purpose land repurposing project that's ongoing. So the Tri-County specific plan, we continue to have some preliminary meetings on that. We have a project management, or new project manager inside of Geosyntec right now that's gonna be helping lead that effort. I'm gonna get that person on our next call, with this group, so that this group gets a chance to meet him as well. And then we're gonna, I'll have him give you some more updates and information on where and what we're doing. Separate from the Tri-County specific plan, we are trying to think through a way to do a pilot program before the next water year, and figure out a way to make that, figure out a way to shape a program or a pilot program that might help, within the context of land repurposing, trying to figure out how do we encourage some type of water savings. I don't want to use the word land fallowing, because that's probably not how the program is going to shape up, but rather focus on groundwater pumping, savings and reductions, and try to figure out a way that we could implement a program within Tri-County. And as we start to flush that idea out a little bit more over the next month or so, I'd like to bring it back to this group and get, straw man at least to this group, and get some feedback from this group, Susan, from your grower advisory committee group as well, and just kind of see how we can shape this program into something that actually would, meet some of the goals that we wanted to meet. And the obvious, it would, in many areas, it would be very easy for us to say, okay, we're just going to do some kind of land fallowing program, but that isn't really the way that our growers are set up here in Tri-County. And so, we're trying to do something akin to that. If anyone on this call has any suggestions or ideas, or is aware of something that they would like to see us make sure that we implement, I think let us know, and we are definitely open to ideas. But we'll be doing some brainstorming over the next month or so, and I hope to have a straw man, at least concept-wise, back to this group at our next meeting in May. SGMA implementation round 2, we already talked about. The round 1 grant, of course, included the Allensworth project, and talked about that. Okay, the groundwater quality mitigation plan. So this is the real gist of today's meeting. If you all recall, in the GSP, the 2022 updated GSP, we basically said to DWR that we would do, as part of the basin-wide coordination agreement, we all agreed that we would do mitigation plans for wells going dry, for based on water levels. Some point we're going to do a subsidence program, and we were going to do a groundwater quality mitigation plan as well. So the water levels and the wells going dry, the domestic well mitigation plan, are in place now across the sub-basin. I haven't heard of anybody actually receiving an application yet across the sub-basin. At least no one's mentioned it.
We've been in the flood.
Yeah, we've been in a flood. Yeah, we've been in a flood. Although if you hear from the April 4th meeting, apparently that didn't matter, because there's wells going dry,
But this group should know Tri-County has on their website, under resources, the claims form and eligibility and all the information necessary for somebody to file a claim for groundwater level impacts to their wells. Be that domestic or agriculture, those claim forms are available.
the other two, on the subsidence mitigation plan, Tom Harder is preparing kind of a framework of what that, of some of the components that plan needs to include. He's been a little bit sidetracked now that we've got the inadequate determination letter, and as Jeff mentioned, we're focused on revising the GSP, so he's been, he hasn't had a chance to work on that, and that's understandable. The priority is definitely the updated GSP response. On the water quality mitigation plan, we committed to having that as a subbasin by the end of June. And I had a conversation yesterday with Don Tucker from Four Creeks. Kind of wanted to do a check-in with him to see what some of the other GSAs are proposing. And we, of course, have said this, Dan said this many, many times, that is the hope that Tri-County is going to be more in line with the rest of the subbasin and be much closer coordinated with all of the subbasin moving forward. And so we had this conversation with Don, and the bottom line was that they haven't really moved forward with any of the other GSAs yet either. So there isn't much information he could share with me because they really haven't had those conversations yet. So I asked him that when they do start to do that they include us as part of that conversation, and we'd like to have some, we'd like to have some input, and then try to make sure that our plan is going to mirror, with local issues, pretty much everyone else's. So this takes me to, the issue at hand, which is as we started having some conversations, Dan and I did, about what this plan should look like. The number one issue that comes up is being able to define an eligibility requirement and criteria for someone who's applying specifically for water quality mitigation. And how do we tie that into some of the water level mitigation program as well, and make sure that those two items are closely coordinated. So, it's easy to say that SGMA says that you can't, as water levels decrease, you can't, cause groundwater impacts to worsen to an undesirable result. Paraphrasing all of that, but so the text is rather straightforward. The real issue is that how do you implement something like that in real life? Because it's not like we had water quality across every single well or majority of the subbasin in 2015, and we can just say, okay, 2015 was the baseline, and we don't want for example, a nitrate plume or some other plume to get worse and be drawn into other areas as water levels are decreasing. And then the other thought, of course, is that we don't mandate individual wells pumping, and we tell you that you can't withdraw a certain amount of water, but the volume and your pumping rates and things like that are all determined by the well owners. And so there's some real issues about trying to figure out a way to say, exceedances in water quality that are specifically due to the GSA allowing water levels to decrease to a certain level. And there's not a one-to-one correlation, as Don pointed out yesterday, in some of the nitrate issues. It's actually water levels going back up that are more likely to cause some problems than water levels decreasing. Just because groundwater levels decrease does not mean that there is a water quality impact. And we've seen wells where if you're pumping from a certain level, everything's fine, you get into a certain zone and you end up with some level of impact And then as water levels have dropped below that, those impacts have gone away. So it's not quite clean in like a well going dry. Yeah, I was gonna sorry.
No, it's a difficult, discussion, and, degradation of water quality, is what we want to avoid, and so the mitigation discussion is difficult, but I think, what we want to do is be protective, and put our actions around how we're protecting particularly domestic wells. I don't think water quality is particularly an issue for agriculture, so mostly it's domestic wells and protecting the groundwater around those domestic wells. So in my mind, that's more important than mitigating after the fact. So that's where we'll put our concentration, and we'll continue to work through what a mitigation plan looks like, and with the rest of the subbasins.
So Joe Turner, who's part of the Geosyntec team, he's a hydrogeologist for us, and Joe actually wrote the section of the GSP, the Tri-County GSP that is on water quality. That was, if you guys remember, the subbasin for Tule was found. They accepted the water quality section as being adequate for and in compliance with SGMA. I asked Joe to kind of sit in on this conversation today, and Joe, I don't know if you have any additional thoughts or comments or anything else that you want to share with the group, and maybe elicit some comments as well from the group.
Sorry, it took me a second. I stuck my speaker somewhere and I couldn't find it, so I could get it next to my mouth. The only thing I would add, and you alluded to it though, is the addressing on water quality is specifically only required if it's the GSA or GSP actions that cause an issue. So nothing we do or nothing the GS do is adding contaminants to the groundwater. They're already out there, either naturally or somebody impact them. So what we have to come up with kind of a policy, give you an example. It's not really an issue here because you'd have to get deeper, but say people start putting in really deep wells when you start pulling up the saline water. That would be an issue you'd want to address and say what you're going to do, what mitigation would be. Another potential that would be resulting from what GSAs would be, or that he kind of alluded to, lowering water levels, where what would happen is you have a certain mass of, say, salts in there that have you below the level because you're reducing the amount of water there. That makes the concentration go up. So that's an issue that was resulting from lower the watering levels that we have to come up with mitigation. Then kind of the third one would be is you're putting in more wells, there's a no plume, and your operations are dragging them somewhere. And that's something we'd want to, you didn't cause the plume, it's there, somebody should be taking care of it, but your operations made it go to a bigger area. So that's what we got to get our handle around. We shouldn't be paying for things that because somebody else put the contaminant in there, or if it's naturally, maybe what's happening is people are putting wells, for example, arsenic's natural, and we lost the zone that diluted out the arsenic. Now everybody's pumping out where the higher arsenic is. So how do we want to address those issues? How do we want to set up mitigation that doesn't put you on the hook to clean up every problem out there when it wasn't your issue, but is a result of your pumping, and your mitigation should be either correcting what you've done to make the problem, or giving water, something like that, but not go clean up the plume or something like that. So that's just kind of in a nutshell why it's more difficult than the other ones, because in reality you're not causing anything, you just might be doing something that makes it a little worse, and that's all we want to deal with.
So trying to write that eligibility requirement really is the key, because obviously there's water quality goals that we've established already in the GSP. There's the MCLs and there's the maximum contaminant limit levels, and then there's the water quality objectives for some of the ag wells and other non-drinking water related wells. And so it's not a matter of just saying that there's an exceedance. It really is a question of where the GSA's role should be when there's an exceedance. We are not the water quality agency for the entire, area. So we want to be careful in exactly what role we end up playing. I'm sure if you talk to the state, they feel like, the GSA should be taking on a stronger role, but we want to be cognizant of what the GSA can and should be doing.
And we want to coordinate with the agencies that do manage water quality. There is and that is, one of the reasons that Thule was able to not be deemed inadequate in water quality. They had a robust section on how they were going to coordinate with the other agencies that manage water quality and what that would look like. So that's part of a solution. It's not the solution.
Yeah. Other subbasins have also committed to preparing these plans. I didn't reach out to all of them, but I did reach out to a few, and just to see where they were on the process. And frankly, a lot of them are dealing with the inadequate determination as well. And so I think, this is one of those items where, as I mentioned at the beginning, Four Creeks is we're going to be meeting with Four Creeks and Intera, who's the DEID's consultant, trying to come up with some ideas and then see if we can come up with a good eligibility requirement that we can incorporate into all of our plans. Does anyone have any thoughts, ideas, suggestions, comments that you want to share on this topic?
No easy ones. I think that Joe's reminder about the language and the requirements of Sigma are important, but I think in the years that we've been working on this, right, collectively, we know that there are folks who really focus on this issue, whose expectations for what GSAs can or should do is probably higher than what the language requires, and it's there's been somewhat confusing or muddled signals that have come out of both the state board and DWR, and so it's another one of those situations where it's not that you don't want to do the right thing, you don't know what the right thing is, and so I also think that there again, some education, or at least bringing this to the state board attention. I mean, if there was a way to kind of summarize the law and the challenges and some of the trade-offs and the complexity or the difficulty of it, that might be another one of your monthly presentations to the state board, is just a 10-minute on the dilemma that is complying with this part of Sigma.
Yeah, that's well said, Jeff.
Yep.
Yeah, Jeff. That's important. Good point. Thank you. Anyone else? Some thoughts, comments, concerns? We certainly want to make sure, as Dan said, we certainly want to address these water quality concerns that we can as a GSA that fall within our purview, but we also want to make sure that there's the appropriate bumpers on the mitigation plan too, because it is expensive, so
Yeah.
can be. Okay. If no one else has any other comments, then we're going to wrap up the meeting early here today. Art, there's Tri-County Board meeting on May 4th, which is next week, Thursday of next week, next Thursday.
1 PM.
At 1 PM, good point. The advisory committee, our next meeting is on the 24th, which I understand, we're getting close to the Memorial Day holiday, so I hope I'm not, I promise we can, get to the points and keep it short. And that's at the same 10 o'clock time frame. I mentioned earlier that the state board meets every 2 weeks, so that would, May 2nd, and I assume that would be the 16th. So keep an eye out for their agendas for any of you that are interested in that, and we'll be attending and continuing to work with them, and as we get more information from our meeting with the state board staff on the GSPs, we'll be sharing that with this group as well, and soliciting your input.
Yes. I agree with all of that. Both subbasins are scheduling meetings hopefully in May, and so it is likely or possible that we will have, at least one of the subbasins will have a meeting before our next advisory committee meeting, and if so, we'll be happy to update you on how that meeting proceeded.
Anything else? Any other last comments from anyone? If not, we'll give you back 20 minutes of your day. All right.
Thank
Great.
you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.